So on to the next stage. What I'm going to do is stab the wire into the wreath frame, drop it into the centre, pull it over, drop it into the centre, so I put it underneath the wreath. Just do that a few times, a bit like casting on when you're sewing, to start the wire onto the wreath frame. Then I'm going to take the bunches of foliages and I'm going to put them in my left hand because I'm right-handed, and the stems are facing towards that direction. And I just put one to the outside and one to the inside, and then bind it on with the wire a couple of times to hold it into place. So you can see how that's fixing on. And then I'm going to take some next pieces of foliage, one to the outside and one to the top this time, bind it on, dropping the wire into the centre, pulling it underneath and pulling it nice and tight. And as I'm going round, I'm making sure that the stems are pointing in this direction and the tops of the foliages are overlapping the stems from the previous ones that I've put on. And we have to keep working in this way, otherwise if we try and change directions, it doesn't look right. It's not so easy to handle and you end up with gaps and things missing out of your wreath. So all I'm doing is just adding one or two pieces at a time and binding them into place, holding with my left hand, the stems pointing in this direction, and just gradually working my way around the wreath, alternating the different types of foliages as I go, binding it on, fixing it nice and firm. And because I've cut the pieces already to the same sorts of size, it should make quite an even, quite a neat wreath. If you wanted to make it more bushy, more exciting, then you could do longer pieces, bigger pieces, more assorted pieces, and that adds a degree of messiness to the overall wreath, makes it more flamboyant. But because they're already cut into size, it's very easy to just fix them into place. Just keep making sure I'm going around the wreath, outside edge, inside edge, to make sure I'm covering all the moss, covering all the mechanics, and making a nice wreath so that when I hang it on the door, there's no gaps, there's no spaces left. Things like the conifer are really good to use because they're the most inexpensive of the foliages. The spruce and the pines and the other foliages, we can buy them, but they tend to be very, very expensive when we do that. So that's why we use a combination of everything to make it a good value product, and also making sure that everything that we use in it is really good quality and long lasting, so that when you hang it on the door, it's not going to go crispy and die. By using a moss frame, we're actually giving the stems some moisture so it keeps it fresh for longer on the door. I know you can buy wreaths from the supermarket, but if you actually look inside them, usually they're made on either straw rings, or sometimes they're just made onto a wire frame that's just clamped together. So there's absolutely no moisture getting to the materials that you're putting onto your wreath. And if you want to use different bits and pieces out of the garden, it's really important to put them onto a moss ring so that they're still drinking all of the time. It keeps it nice and fresh and makes sure it'll last all the way through the Christmas period for you. So you see it's going together quite nicely and quite quickly. The binding wire is the quickest way of fixing them onto the wreath, and it does create a really neat, really firm base for putting your decorations onto it at the end. Mixing up the foliages, adding different bits and pieces. Some of these things I've cut from the garden, some of them I've bought from the shop. And it's a really nice combination of different textures, different colours, different materials to make it a nice exciting wreath from the door. So we just keep going round. If you find that you've missed a bit and you want to go and put an extra piece in, there's two ways that we can do it. We can wire the piece and put it in separately, but what you can't do is go back on yourself. You have to keep going round. So if you find you've suddenly gone wrong, the best thing to do is to unwind it and go back to where you've gone wrong. A bit like when you're doing knitting or sewing and you have to take it apart. It's frustrating, but once you've got the knack of it and you know which direction you're going in, you're making sure the stems are always pointing away from where you're working. You're holding it with your left hand if you're right-handed, using the wire to hold it into place. Then it'll all go in the right direction for you. We just keep rounding it round, fixing the pieces on, adding the different materials as we're going along. It's nice and tight, and making sure those stems are hitting the moss every time so they've got some moisture going into the stems, keep everything lovely and fresh.